This is Sciographies, an introduction to the people who make science happen. I'm your host, David Barclay. I'm an oceanographer with the Faculty of Science here at Dalhousie University. And on Sciographies, I interview different types of scientists about what shaped their interests, their career path, and how they get their research ideas. Thanks for joining us. In this episode, we talked to Dr. Shannon Sterling. She's an environmental scientist with a background in hydrology and geography. Her research led to the founding of CarbonRun in 2022. It's a carbon dioxide removal startup that she helps lead as its chief scientific officer. Dr. Sterling talks to us about growing up on the banks of the Capilano River in North Van and coming to terms with geoengineering as a necessity for climate change mitigation. She's also going to talk to us about founding the startup that puts rivers on the map of the CDR landscape. I do like to always start at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I was perusing your CV. Also, I do very little research as I find it
more fresh,
more interesting the less I know.
Oh, really? Ooh, that is genuinely surprised.
That's kind of true. No, I can't help but looking a little bit. But anyways, but I did notice you were born in North Van.
Yeah.
An interesting time in Vancouver's history, a growing time.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a ski person?
I wasn't. I was more of a slow look at the trees, look at the water, smell the flowers, and just, my backyard extended into an old growth forest.
Right.
And I just looked at the moss and lay in the rain I grew up on a river with, the Capilano River with 5 different salmon species and worked to try and restore them from the dam they built. So all these seeds were planted early on.
A very beautiful part of the world.
Mm-hmm. And it was early on, too, that clear cutting back then was just like the whole mountain, right?
Sure.
And they'd have roads and landslides, and that just didn't seem quite right at the time.
Right.
And that was a big motivator for me. Like, why is this not right? Like, how can this go on? And can science help us in the answer?
Sure.
But I never knew that you could actually study that. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to work for the UN, actually. That was my thing. So I went to McGill to study political theory.
Okay.
And that was 1990. And that was when the first UN climate change report, IPCC report came out that year. You know, everyone was talking about that. And there was a course in the geography department about climate change. And I was like, you can study this? Like, you can actually have jobs in this? And then I discovered you could work I did summer NSERCs with Michael Church, a fluvial geomorphologist in BC who studied rivers. Sure. And looked that you could, study why clear cuts are bad from a hydrology and landslide point of view. And it was interesting. And then when I did my master's with him, and I was living with a house full of people in Greenpeace. And they were out there protesting the Clayoquot Sound protest, and they had midnight oil coming, and it was...
Hang on a second.
Going on.
Midnight oil. How can we sleep when our beds are burning?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But my master's supervisor, Mike Church, he was the scientific panel for Clayoquot. And I was like, I want to be on that side. Like, he seems to have more influence and made a difference.
I like it. There's some point where you decide, like, chaining yourself to a tree or taking an academic route.
Yeah.
With a similar motivation.
Faith in science can make a difference, right? Impact.
Yeah, sure.
How do you choose your impact? Maybe a criminal record is not the best way to go. So I was like, okay, I'll try and be, keep integrity and credibility, right?
Very interesting. Yeah, that's a good roadmap.
Then it was a boom. They realized clear cutting, what the impacts were, and the BC government, they negotiated with the U.S. because they were subsidizing the forest industry too much. It's called stumpage tax, and they decided they'll increase the stumpage tax in BC, but if it goes to forest restoration. And then all of a sudden it was this boom of a lot of money going into watershed restoration. So I worked in that for 5 years, and it was really cool. You could, develop these big watershed management plans, impact, restoration, monitoring, community engagement. So I did that for 5 years, and it was really great and loved it. But then I met my husband at UBC, and he had taken a job at Duke University. Postdoc. And I was like, okay, either you stay here in this wonderful, beautiful place, or you follow your love. So I just went, okay, going to Duke. But Duke, there's a professor there, and he's like, study the global water cycle. go see. And I found a big knowledge gap, and we got a science paper in the first year. And so I did a PhD there with actually what turned out to be this cohort of amazing people. Bill Schlesinger, he was one of the leading people at Duke that I got the pleasure of working with. He was Al Gore's scientific climate advisor, and he knew how to get the message across, and he was trying to communicate climate change. So pretty interesting time. Studied also the global carbon cycle. So this is where the hydrology and global carbon cycle meet. And then
your focus shifted from something like more local to global. And coinciding with an explosion in terms of monitoring and data availability and whatnot.
Satellites, exactly. And I'm a little more theoretical, but it was like the global carbon cycle, the global water cycle, and how things work and where the big levers are. And what's really interesting, and the link to Dalhousie, is that Bill made this course called Global Biogeochemical Cycles or Global Biogeochemistry. And I took that and I was just, this is amazing. It's basically the geochemistry of the earth, the atmosphere, forests, soils, water, oceans, rivers, and links it all together. And it's a synthesis course. So after I did my postdoc in France with Global Climate Group there, I was a Marie Curie postdoc, which is another cool thing. But I brought this course when I arrived at Dal in 2010. I introduced this course, and it's a lot. It's a crazy amount of material, but it's the science behind climate change, right? It's the chemistry. This is why the atmospheric chemistry is changing, and it's the links. And I've been teaching that course every year since. And during this climate, the climate IPCC reports and how things are becoming more obviously that we are not able to manage this carbon cycle. Like it's the projections that what seemed unthinkable when I started teaching this course is now the reality. We can get into geoengineering. So, but that course and teaching that every year with the students, it really set the stage for this cool invention that led to this new carbon dioxide removal pathway, which led to me founding a company, CarbonRun. So that is the big arc. We can go a little more granular.
There's tons of interesting stuff in there, but I will go all the way back to Vancouver and running into the forest. So what was North Van like at that time? Was it like, are your parents granola?
Mine were like the product of the early 60s. Okay. So they were resisting the granola.
It's more suburban
anti-granola. Yeah. So the granolas, they were a little concerned about me choosing this field. Like I was definitely rebellion. They were like, what?
What did they want you to become?
A housewife.
A housewife. Okay.
Seriously. Anyway, I failed that one.
And what did they do for work?
My mom, she was an opera singer.
Okay, and not a housewife?
Part-time opera singer, mostly housewife. Yeah. And then my dad was a mechanical engineer, and he founded a company and did...
He had his own company.
He had his own company, yeah. So there's a boom of construction in the 80s in Vancouver, so he would do the commercial buildings and do the HVAC, and so it's pretty... Yeah.
Okay. And but a numerical, rational guy.
Very rational.
Bit of an influence, keeping you out of handcuffs at crucial times.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely was trying to rebel by going into way to McGill and but there was always that this was the way to get credibility was through science and communicating to him. That's true. Mm-hmm.
And in high school, I mean, so you said you went to McGill to study politics.
Yeah, political theory.
So you weren't necessarily quantitatively focused at that time?
No. Yeah. But then
you're reading books.
I saw the light. Yeah. I just didn't know how things worked. Trying to figure out how
it would have been an amazing time to be in Montreal because you were there over the referendum?
No, I just left. That was 95.
Oh, okay.
So I had graduated in 93.
Okay, so you were building up to that.
Yeah, so there was a little bit of tension.
Yeah, must have been an interesting time to study politics.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was it, yeah. But, I realized that those people in my class, they were so far advanced. The Eastern Canadians, they'd grown up in Ottawa and they knew about politics. And I was like, and I read Thomas Hobbes in Old English. And I was like, I can't do this. Sorry.
You're like, I'm a Locke person, not a Hobbes guy. Yeah.
I just was like, maybe I'm not so good at this. This isn't my strength.
But you endured 4 years.
Well, I switched, actually.
Oh, you switched,
I switched out and moved into geography, which is back then, if you do a Bachelor of Science in Geography, it's like environmental science. It's like the British model.
Sure. So in the summers, you mentioned you had this crucial NSERC undergraduate summer research
award.
Assistants awards. Yeah.
USRAs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did you go do those?
Yeah, it was amazing. I did 3.
Yeah.
So I got 3. UBC every time. So
Okay.
the first field job I had, we were helicoptered up into north of Whistler, up towards the Squamish Lillooet Glacier.
Yeah.
And we basically helicoptered up to a ridge and left there for 3 weeks. And then it was very cool.
And you're like,
and there's only
just
radio,
to paint
telephone.
the picture, you're like 20 years old.
20 years old. And
Yeah.
I was there with another undergrad.
And you're
just
given
by ourselves. And
responsibility to what?
But my supervisor went back in the helicopter, and I'm like, "You're not staying with us." Like, say goodbye. And there was, grizzlies, and we only had this radio telephone that we were trying to make work, and it obviously didn't work because we weren't familiar with that. And eventually they were worried about us, so they sent a helicopter to check on us. But my mom, that's funny. My supervisor called my mom. He said, "I'm a little worried because I haven't heard from the girls," and she's like, "You're not with them." He's like, "No, they're just alone in the wilderness." So, but it's cool. So we're collecting dust. So about
Dust.
like dust.
You're collecting dust.
Collecting dust.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I heard that right.
We're taking soil samples to see how much dust came from Asia, from China. So trying to get a sense of how
Hang on a second.
elements moved in the earth.
Hang on a second. We need a definition of dust, I think.
Sure.
Because
Light, fine particles that could be small enough that could be transported by wind from the Gobi Desert to BC. Yeah.
Okay, and so you're collecting dust. How does one even go about collecting dust?
Well, there was a transect, and we had to just kind of take a little bag. It was the surface.
Okay,
So
it's already landed.
Yeah, and just a Ziploc. And
Yeah.
It was
So you did that for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's your first foray into working science.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty nice.
Field work is pretty amazing. Like to be able to go to these places that no one normally would be able to go. And so then I got to go to the Charlottes for quite a while. That was
wow.
Charlottes, Hattagawai back then.
Yeah.
We called it the Charlottes. And looking for landslides from helicopters and trying to map those out. And that was,
So that was like flying around daily in a helicopter?
yeah.
Nervous at all about that?
No, just got really motion sick because you've got your head in a map
Yeah.
and you're trying to figure out where is that landslide on this map, and this is before GPS.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and it was really, you get really sick, but it was so beautiful, so nice. Yeah.
And then you had one more.
Yes. So one was actually near Clayoquot Sound.
Yeah.
It was near Ucluelet, called Carnation Creek, which is a long-term ecosystem studying thing. And one thing my supervisor was working on is called bedload transport, which is rocks rolling along the bottom of rivers. And what size move how quickly means whether the river is going to change shape or flood somewhere else. But it's really hard to measure the movement of the rocks. So we were sticking magnets in these rocks and drilling holes and then trying to wait for a flood and then trying to see how far they move down the river.
So that was your first true study of rivers.
Yeah.
Did that like light a flame in you?
Yeah, I just love it. Just be able to do field work on a river.
Sure.
And it just seems so cool.
Then you went to UBC for your master's.
Yeah. In BC, there's so much rain and the certain type of bedrock. You have these like liquefied landslides that kind of go down a river channel, and and that's what took out the Squamish highways, the road to Whistler in '82, and it killed. Like they just took out the highway, and cars kept driving over. So it's a big natural hazard too that we didn't know much about. So I was mapping the frequency and spatial distribution of these landslides. So basically, you got to hike up the old deposits until there was a waterfall, and then you date the scars on the trees from the rocks flying down the mountain. It's beautiful. So we basically hike through forest to waterfalls every day and map the dates of the landslides. Pretty fun. Yeah.
You said you moved to Duke for love. So you got to tell me how that happened.
So it was in a Green College, this interdisciplinary college. I met a friend who had a friend who was doing a PhD in the same lab. And he's a professor here in Dalhousie in the microbiology department. And it was just a coup de foudre, as they say in French. And, so it's either you follow this love of your life or you stay here. And just went for it. It was
right.
That was it.
Yeah. Do you ever think about what? No, I'm just joking. I'm not going to ask that question. No. Were you planning on staying on at UBC to do your PhD? You kind of.
At that point, I had started consulting. So I was working for.
You'd already graduated.
I graduated, and then I was working with Northwest Hydraulic Consultants, who's this super cool hydraulic engineering company. So that was 5 years, and I was asked to become principal, and it was awesome. It was really great. So it was sad to not stay there.
Right. So because you went to Duke back into grad school.
Yeah.
From the working world back into grad school. Yeah. So your work at Duke was really a transformation from the local to global systems. And what exactly did you start to study there? I
discovered that we did not have a very good understanding of evapotranspiration back then, which is the anti-rain, my husband calls it. It's the land-atmosphere flux, and especially how it changes with different land cover types. So global climate models weren't representing that very well. Right. So I came up with the first independent global data set on actual evapotranspiration for different land cover types and what was controlling them. So kind of broke it down. So it was really... Is
it significant compared to the ocean?
Well, it's a vertical flux.
Yeah.
And it's really significant in terms of energy balance and water balance. And if you change it, like that's what causes heat waves, right? Yeah. So if it's suppressed through drought, then it can trigger heat waves, and it regulates how much water there is, available water. So if there's the proportion of rain that either goes up or becomes runoff. So it's pretty a very important lever, and it's also the nexus of the carbon cycle as well. So for net primary production, plants that photosynthesize release transpiration. So a lot of the water coming from the soil, it goes through the plants through evapotranspiration into the atmosphere. So it has a lot of, and that creates local air moisture for rainfall as well. So it creates precipitation recycling, makes things cooler, makes the land a nicer place. So later on, like it's a way to demonstrate how plants create a livable world. Where there's fewer temperature extremes. They keep the water kind of in their arena through these processes, which is actually really, really cool. And without them, it's just like a concrete parking lot. It's hot and cold at night and like a desert. So
what were your overall impressions of living in the U.S.?
I had a hard time. It was like Jesse Helms' time, right? So I was, I kind of cried every time I left the house for a little while. Just like you go drive by these abandoned malls and there's like shut up, and I was like, what am I doing? And so it was kind of funny. As a result, John, my husband's amazing. I'm like, we have to go 180 degrees from here. We're going to Paris.
Right. And that was on you, or that was on him?
Me.
Like, I mean, obviously you got a big award to go there.
And so did my husband. He got the Institut Pasteur award, which we're so lucky. But sometimes if you just set a vision, sometimes things fall into place. So it was like, we have to go, as far as we can from North Carolina. So that was Paris, right? In my mind.
So how does one even get the idea to go after a Marie Curie postdoc?
I didn't know until I got to France. So I got a Chateaubriand, like American Embassy fellowship to go there. Okay. I just went. I was just like, I'm just going. And then found this lab. So there's applied hydrology lab in Paris. Back then it was called the Université de Pierre et Marie Curie, and now it's Sorbonne University. But the head of the lab, and he was welcoming, and I got a grant. And then they said, you should apply for this Marie Curie. And I got it, which was amazing. But Paris was great. It was super. So there I applied this observational database for my PhD, and I modeled it, and I incorporated better land cover, what they call it, parameterization for the global hydrologic model. But it's interesting, and then there's a whole other piece that we haven't talked about, which is when I came here. I don't know if you want to segue into that. I was going to look at evapotranspiration and do global modeling. That was sort of my background when I came to Dalhousie, but we don't have a flux tower, eddy covariance tower in Nova Scotia. That's one of these things that measure instantaneous vertical fluxes of carbon, water, and you can get good evapotranspiration measurements. Then I was on a panel looking at the salmon numbers that have been plummeting 99% since in the past 10 years in Nova Scotia, which I was really surprised about. So there's Dr. Eddie Halfyard. He's a salmon biologist who I started working with in about 2012 and discovered that the water chemistry here was not in good shape. And it was... we did a temporal analysis and saw that aluminum, which is toxic, has been increasing and really took a big increase after 2003. That's toxic to most forms of life. And so we're looking at why. And we discovered that there's the soils didn't recover. So the acid rain titrated out the good cations like calcium, magnesium. And then we're still there's still coal burning from Pennsylvania and the Great Lakes region that's landing on Nova Scotia, which is still above critical loads. So the soils aren't recovering, and the calcium is still going down.
Sure.
And then there's another layer with climate change. So the soils are warming, they're producing more acids as well, like organic acids, leaching those out. So it's causing this perfect storm of bad water chemistry that's killing the salmon.
I see. So the rivers have aluminum in them, but also are acidifying. Is that right?
The pH. Sometimes we measure we had a program with the Nova Scotia Salmon Association funded by DFO, and did lots of snapshot measurements of pH and everything, and we were measuring in the 3s, which is like vinegar.
I don't know if I want to swim in that.
No, that's maybe good exfoliation for. There's acid episodes that are really intense. That'll kill most. Yeah. So interesting. The only solution, and it's not just the salmon; it's the whole food chain. So at the calcium levels we have is below the threshold for like the water flea, the base of the food chain. So that's not good. And the only way to fix it is to add calcium back into the system, add alkalinity back into the system. And
this is how we get into
are we ready to get
your
into that?
business? I mean,
kind of.
Yeah,
well,
right. This is where the idea comes from. It's not just to remove carbon from the atmosphere, but to replenish some of the minerals missing in the
definitely. So we weren't thinking about carbon for quite a while so Canada has this problem. And Nova Scotia is actually, if you look at all the acidified areas in the chemistry, we're one of the worst in terms of what hardest hit. But the government didn't do any mitigation work but Norwegians had, so they've been adding alkalinity to their rivers, and the Swedes have been doing liming, like more adding it to the soils, and there's lots of studies. And so the Nova Scotia Salmon Association fundraised to get one of these several $100,000 silos that could dose this dosing system that was basically developed in Norway here. And first one was in 2005, and then the second one was installed 2017 on the eastern shore on a river there. So, and there, because there were still salmon, but they weren't doing very well. And so they just add alkalinity right into the river. And since then the smolt population, the juveniles, it's tripled.
Yeah.
So it's really made a big difference.
That's an interesting problem for sure.
So it was interesting. So this Paris Accord, this David Bierling, and his mandate, I guess, was to look at enhanced weathering, which is spreading usually silicate rocks on land. And I wrote to him, and I'm like, we're already doing that. We're spreading rocks on land for acidification restoration. I'm like, maybe there's something here. So, and he flew out, and we had a great visit. But in terms of our ability to change the water chemistry, it's a lot easier from that adding directly to rivers than putting it on the soils, because it's harder to measure. It takes longer. So that was the idea. Yeah.
So you formed this company, CarbonRun.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
April last year, 2022.
And it seems to me like the money to support this kind of work, whether it's academic or industrial or on the cusp, really, like you're talking about, is pretty plentiful right now.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. So the underlying premise behind the private sector helping out with the climate change is that governments or the UN, they'll be too slow, right? Like, I think from our experience trying to get money to save the salmon, for 10 years we're just hitting our heads against the wall. And so when there was this private sector opportunity, I'm like, this is the way we have to go, because they can make it happen faster, like the vaccines, and it does seem that is the way to go, but it's not easy. Like there's conflicts, and you have to manage the conflicts. And
so, can you tell me more about CarbonRun?
Yeah. So we, for some strange reason, of all this landscape of what they call geochemical CDR, which it's less engineered, a little more open in the weathering, and No one had been looking in rivers. We were the first ones in rivers. So we're trying to figure out how to scale up safely and equitably, right? So looking at hydroelectric partnerships, that's maybe a natural industry partner, and community groups, and seeing where this would be most equitably done. It makes the most sense. Well, has maximum restoration while drawing down carbon. Luckily, the same recipe will address both. So pH-wise, there's a shift in carbonate speciation from CO2 to the more stable bicarbonate around 5, 6. And also with aluminum, it goes from toxic to non-toxic around 5 or 6. So it's really kind of helpful that way. So you don't need to, it's the same recipe almost.
And in terms of recipe, just to paint a picture for us, you're essentially taking some sort of chalky substance, you're putting it in the water, and what's the basic chemistry that's happening it's taking carbon out of the atmosphere? Can you just run us through the basic chemistry how that happens?
So you can imagine a river's going down, a forested landscape, and trees are pumping out CO2. CO2 is being produced in the soils, and then it's like being soda streamed into the rivers at certain points. And that's the carbon that is acting as the acid. So when you add like dolomite or calcite, which is old shells, so totally unprocessed, but just crushed, put them in, and then it dissolves completely. So that's really important, that there's no silts produced or anything. It's just the dissolution reaction takes place within minutes, and then you have water that's got more alkalinity in it and more calcium and magnesium.
So it can suck more CO2 out of the roots of the trees, essentially, to oversimplify things.
Yeah, that would otherwise be evading. Right. And then you turn that CO2 to the anion, so it doesn't evade. Yeah, so that's that magic thing too. So you reduce, you're increasing the land-ocean connection of the carbon cycle.
Yeah, that's cool.
But it's been really great people to work with, and it's going to be exciting few years.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming today. It's been very interesting, and I've really enjoyed hearing about it.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
In our next episode, we'll talk to Dr. Melanie Zerba. Her research in environmental governance explores a community-first approach to designing research projects with community partners. If you're enjoying Sciographies, hit subscribe, give us a rating, and I'm your host, David Barclay. Thanks for listening. Sciographies is brought to you by Dalhousie University's Faculty of Science and CKDU 88.1 FM in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Our producer is Nicole Killowee. You can learn more about Sciographies at dal.ca/Sciographies.